Good day, and welcome to Sundaram Mutual's Wisecast series of webinars under the tag name EMI. As those who are already seen it will be familiar, E stands for economy, M stands for the stock markets, and I stands for your investment allocations. So this month, with the latest updates on the economy, including what the RBI governor said earlier today, I will cover now in my presentation. So just give me a minute as I just share my screen. Now we're going to be talking about the economy, the stock markets, and investment allocations. So from a perspective of the economy, clearly the dominant part now is the coronavirus and the recovery from that. So the first thing we've got to recollect from a world economy perspective is that this was a medical crisis of contagion. And so the lockdown was the only solution in the absence of a vaccine and a cure. Day by day progresses, we are hoping that a vaccine or cure will soon be available. So if you see the lockdown, the color coding tells you the red was the most severe and yellow is the lightest. So as you can see from a middle peak period of severity, the world is gradually easing up because they're getting control over the virus, right? It's true of the rest of the world. All the countries are covered here. So by and large, the world is in a yellowish orangish state, right? Now look at the economic scenario is that the impact of the COVID plus the lockdowns together resulted in massive GDP declines across the globe. As per the World Bank's estimate, the world is expected to post a 4.9% negative GDP growth this year, and the emerging economies are leading it with 3% negative, and advanced economies are higher with 8% negative, right? Within the advanced countries, you can see that the United Kingdom and the Euro area are the worst affected, and within the Euro area, you can see that France, Italy, and Spain were the most affected. In the emerging countries, if you can see, China, in fact, is going to post a positive GDP growth because they incurred the virus a bit earlier. And if you see here, India is among the worst affected with a 4.5% negative GDP growth, right? So the response to the COVID worldwide has been three-pronged. Rate action by the central bankers, monetary stimulus by the central bankers, fiscal stimulus by the governments. So if you see the weighted average policy rate of the developed markets has crashed sharply down from the previous crisis. If you see in 2008 and 10, it was at about 2.25. It has now come to about 0.25 levels. So clearly the global financial crisis, which was the previous crisis the world experienced, compared to that, there's been a far stronger response in the rate cuts. The same is true in terms of the expansion of the balance sheet by the central bankers. The G4 countries, UK, Europe, Japan, and the US, put together, as you can see, compared to the August 2008 levels, it's multiple times higher. So 12-month change in balance sheet is almost 28% of the balance sheet. At the same time, fiscal responses also varied. If you look at across the major countries, the fiscal deficits for the current year and the last 2020 are ranging between 10 to 15% negative fiscal deficits. And hence, if you see G4 plus China, their fiscal deficit are expected to expand to 13.4%, and the US fiscal is set to touch 19% of the GDP. So massive forces have been unleashed against the COVID crisis. As a result of that, we do expect that unlike the global financial crisis, which saw a U-shaped gradual recovery, this time we're expecting a V-shaped recovery. One is the reason is the throwing of multiple forces at the virus. Second is the lockdown severity meant that the infection by and large got contained to a few zones, geographic zones, and did not spread. And third is, I think there's the world's might is also going through its pharmaceutical labs and hospitals into discovering a vaccine and a cure. And roughly in about a year's time frame, definitely we should have a vaccine or a cure. All of these are contributing to the reasons why a V-shaped recovery is expected. And let's, from a world perspective, let's focus a little bit on the US. The reason I say that is that the US is a harbinger for the rest of the world. We could spend a lot of time discussing individual countries, but I think US can be taken as a proxy for the world outside India. And from that perspective, you see, the anchor for expecting a V-shaped recovery is that if you see the US personal consumption expenditure, the blue line, and the US unemployment rate, right? In the last crisis itself, consumption in the last crisis recovered well ahead of unemployment pickup. Why? Because higher incomes account for a larger share of consumption. The lower income households need stimulus. So those people who shut down their consumption but have the money easily bounce back. So that's why a V-shaped recovery is expected. Another one is that the US in the last crisis had 97% of household debt as a percentage of the GDP. Today it's only 74%. So there's ample room for consumers to borrow when they feel like buying something compared to the last crisis, right? So if you see all of this effect is that being seen on the ground, yes, there are a number of green shoots which are visible. The first is I would like to talk on the retail. They have taken number of the major retailers, and there are three bars in each company's name. The three bars are what is the sales last year, same period, what is the forecast by the market for this year, same period, and what is the actual. And invariably, you can see the actual sales has turned out better than both the forecast and the year ago sales. So clearly, the recovery is happening faster than anticipated. The same way in the housing scenario, the 30-year fixed loan, Freddie Mac, which is a government company there which lends, has dropped to as low as 2.88% fixed. So clearly, the low interest rate regime has translated to the retail consumer in the US, and hence new home sales are at their highest since 2007, putting the recovery firmly on track, as well as existing home sales are also well above the historical levels. If you see the three periods there, it's way above that. So clearly the housing sector is seeing a boom in the US. Right? As a result of this, the manufacturing surveys, number of states in the US, all of them showing varying shapes of V-shaped recovery, and overall business conditions, right? The US business conditions is showing a sharp V-shaped recovery, right? A couple of points on the broader world economy, though I'm not going to cover it in detail. Driving mobility, which is a good indication of the lockdown and the recovery, clearly tells you that the percentage of economies above 70% of their averages and above 90% of their averages. Clearly, it's a sharp increase. You can see the V-shaped formation. And the same is true of transit trends from country to country. If you look at it, the US, Germany, Italy, Brazil, and France, all of them showing a V-shaped recovery, right? And then one important country around us, which is China. China also had the virus earlier, has also recovered earlier. So one is on the retail side, the daily average passenger car sales. Second is on the industrial side, the heavy truck sales. Both are showing a V-shaped recovery. And the services sector, auto sales, box office, property sales, hotel occupancy, subway volume, all of them are showing varying degrees of improvement. So as a result, to pull it all together, China's PMI has already recovered well above the 50 mark, followed by the US and the Europe. So clearly China is a lead here because it got the viruses first. So the way China progresses, you can expect the rest of the world to follow, right? So how is the post-COVID world in terms of the GDP shaping up? If you see here, clearly China, the yellow line, is going to recover the earliest and the greatest. Then you have the overall world average, below which is the emerging market and others excluding China. And then you have the developed countries. So the classically, as you can see, China is going to lead the growth, followed by emerging, then followed by the advanced countries. So to put that in a number perspective, we expect the world to show a jump back of 5.4% of positive GDP, of which the advanced economies will grow at 4.8 and emerging economies at 5.9. So that V-shaped recovery is clearly example in numbers. Another very good indicator to judge the future growth rate apart from a PMI is the world trade number seen by the Baltic Dry Index. As you can see, in December pre-crisis, it was at 1,090, and then it dropped because of the crisis to 600. It's a 40% drop, but since then it has tripled now to 2,000. So you can clearly see that the 1 month change is 53%, the 6 month change is 221%. So world trade is clearly on the path of a V-shaped recovery, auguring well for the world, right? So effectively, to summarize, what has COVID done? COVID has pushed back global growth by a year. So before the crisis happened, the world was already expected to show a recovery in the current year, right, up to first quarter 21 of 3.5%. But what COVID has done is that basically it shifted that goalpost by 1 year. So effectively, COVID is going to be, end of the day, a 1 year crisis when it hit it very hard, but the bounce back will be equally sharp, right? Moving on to our country, India, we are also, in a way, summarizing it to say, riding the recovery. So on India's economic outlook, just one point to bear is that pre-crisis, if you see a gross value added, which is a form of GDP, services, industry, and agriculture, all put together for the last 2 years, since the last quarter of 2018, have been on a decline. So India was already in a slowing economy before the crisis came. And impact on COVID in India, first, we were the most intense on lockdown. Hence, initially, we were comparatively more successful medically. But the economic impact was severe despite Atmanirbhar Bharat because the lockdown saw its own impact on the economy. And then as the things improved, we have moved towards easing mobility and resuming economic activities. So this same graph which you saw earlier, I'd like now to highlight India in this. If you see at the bottom, close to the bottom, India is there between Hungary and Indonesia. And as you can see, we are the only country in this chart to have gone to a 10 level maximum severity for 4 weeks. And then we were at 8 for a couple of more weeks. And then we have gradually reduced. Even now we are only at 4, whereas some other countries are at 2. So India has seen the sharpest and the most severest lockdown in the world. So naturally our economic impact was also more severe because already we were also in a slowdown. But what the lockdown achieved was to contain it initially to the urban areas of India. So effectively rural India was actually allowed to come back into business pretty quickly, which you saw in the Rabi harvest, right? So, but however, overall, the Indian economy was among the worst hit in the world. Compared to the G7, we had a 24% negative GDP growth, whereas the UK and the others were much, much lesser than us, right? So the Atmanirbhar program, which was almost 10% of 10.5% of GDP, it tried to deliver rebound of the growth by using guarantees, by using lifelines to cash flow starved businesses. At the same time, it was able to keep the impact cost on our country at a minimal level. How? We shall see. So as you can see here, of the 10.5%, 6.5% was the fiscal stimulus, 4% was the RBI's monetary stimulus. So of the 6.5%, they managed to limit the fiscal deficit impact at only 0.8% of GDP. So why was this possible? This was possible because a big change for India was that in the crisis, the crude price dropped from a $80 level to a $40 level. This is important for India because we import 80% of our crude and the government was able to hike excise duties to get in about 1.7 lakh crores of revenue. That's how the fiscal deficit impact was minimized by the government, right? But the government's package, which is listed on the left, if you see on the right, by and large, only 30 to 40% has been transmitted. So one of the reasons why we had a 24% negative GDP growth is because the government's relief package did not get fully translated. So in the coming quarters, you will see that fully transmit and hence the V-shaped recovery should improve. Only one case where the NABARD emergency working capital funding for farmers 83% has been dispersed. So clearly the rural area has been favored. You also remember that there was a 40,000 crore additional for the NREGA scheme, essentially for the rural India. So RBI has supported the government through multiple actions laid out in this table with another rate cut, taking the total rate cut to 115 basis points, pushing the repo to unattractive territory, and a whole host of measures to support it, right? But here again, there's been only partial transmission. While RBI has cut the rate by 115 basis points, existing loans have only seen a 23 basis points drop. New loans have seen a 72 basis points drop. But as you can see, there's still another 40 basis points in new loans to be transmitted and a lot more on existing loans to be passed on to the consumer, right? Another thing which the RBI did is that at the end of the moratorium extension, right, RBI came up and said no more moratorium because that was a cause of worry as to when the borrowers will be able to pay, and said that now we can put in a place a resolution framework to ease the debt burden rather than just push the moratorium. So they set up a committee under Mr. K.V. Kamath, and the Kamath committee came up, and with its recommendations, 26 sectors are expected to benefit, and almost 66% of all rated companies in India will be able to benefit from this, of which triple B and above will be 71. And as you go lower down the credit curve, naturally lesser number of companies will benefit, right? So construction, real estate, chemicals are likely to be the key beneficiaries of this move. Another thing which, apart from what the RBI has done, is from a reforms perspective, is the Indian agriculture reforms recently passed by Parliament. I know there have been political protests against it, but as all reforms, there is always a pain along with the gain. And I think that ultimately, this is a watershed moment for Indian agriculture. And with the corporatization of agriculture, it should take our productivity levels much higher, the right crops to be planted, and an assurance of price to the farmers, which is very big positive for Indian agriculture. right? So as a result of the positive monsoon that we started off with and the additional labor available to rural India because of the migrants going from urban to rural, we are seeing that Kharif sowing has seen a sharp increase as the percentage of normal areas sown is at 100% plus. And in fact, if you take same period of the previous years, you are even better than the last high seen in 2016 when the sowing was at this level. So clearly good signs for the future from an agricultural production perspective. The other indicators which indicate that things are normalizing despite a negative, sharp negative in the GDP growth are the relative traffic congestions in India. As you can see, India is in the middle of the pack, right, in terms of the traffic congestions, which is a good sign. Vehicle registrations, if you see, right, two-wheelers are at 70% of last year. Cars are at 95% last year. Tractors are at 184%. Clearly, the rural effect is seen there. Whereas trucks, buses, and three-wheelers are still very low, and you have to wait for them. They are in a cyclical downturn. Will take a little more time to come back, right? GST collections have seen a sharp V-shaped recovery, which is good news from a fiscal deficit perspective. E-way bill generation, which is where the government buys, right, have also seen a V-shaped recovery, both intrastate and interstate. And wholesale and passenger, retail passenger vehicle sales, right? You can see private vehicle sales have sharply gone up and wholesale sales also has gone up. Tractor sales you already saw have remained very strong. Core electricity production, as you can see, has a V-shaped recovery, and electricity consumption has also, because of the rains and the lockdowns, it went through ups and downs, but you can see the broad trend of a V-shaped recovery. And finally, because of the work from home, people spending time at home, television has been the main consumption by people. So the TV advertisements have also shown a V-shaped bounce back, right? Freight movement, whether it's cement, steel, coal, fertilizer, total freight, all are showing varying degrees of V-shaped recoveries. And so to summarize it, right, manufacturing PMI, as you can see, has sharply gone up above 50. RBI governor mentioned today it's about 56% right now. And then services PMI, so this graph shows you that as of last month, it was just under 50. So you see the RBI governor made a point that is about 49.6. 50 is the borderline above which it can be saying coming out of a recession. So clearly both manufacturing and services are showing strong recovery, right? And overall unemployment, whether it's urban or rural, is coming back to pre-COVID levels with all of this recovery in business. So overall, if you look at economic activity, Jeffries has got an economic index which tells you that today we are at 93% of pre-COVID levels in terms of resumption of economic activity. So clearly, India is also on the throes of a V-shaped recovery. In addition, the government has also not wasted this crisis and pushed through a lot of structural reforms to improve our overall economy. And crude drop has been great advantage to India because of the current account deficit. For every $10 drop in price, India's current account deficit drops by 0.5% of GDP, right? So as a result, for a brief while in the last quarter, you had a positive current account surplus for after a long time, right? So overall, from a rating perspective, because that's critical to get foreign flows, we are seeing that though there was a change to negative with some and some downgraded it, but we are still investment grade, and we think that we should get through this crisis without meaningful downgrades. Why? Because of the fact that reforms are a key part, and the fiscal roadmap and the intent to reform are being by and large lived up to, except for the crisis effect, right? So again, coming to India's post-COVID GDP, we are seeing that from a negative 4.5% for the calendar year. Today, the RBI governor said we'll be at 9.5%. That's for the financial year, because the first quarter of this year had a positive 4% GDP growth, which is why in the IMF's calculation, that positive is helping to make a projection of 4.5. But since India starts from April was 24% negative, and you will see that by the last quarter, Mr. Shaktikant has also mentioned that we will be in positive territory in this year. So overall, we should be at about 9.5% negative. But the next year, as per World Bank, we should be at a 6% positive, which is what I was trying to explain to you. But a 24% negative, we'll see a 9% negative in the current quarter, and then that is the July, August, September quarter. October, November, December, current quarter, we should see a to 1.5 to 2% negative GDP growth. And the last quarter of the year, as Mr. Shakti Kandadas explained, the agricultural harvest should help us to turn positive GDP growth in the last quarter. So clearly a V-shaped recovery is on the anvil, right? Apart from this, India has also got long-term, medium-term structural advantages because vis-a-vis China, China has a declining labor population. India has a rising labor population. And the COVID crisis has made people to express an intention to move their capacity outside China, which was hitherto the manufacturing capital. 44% people say it has increased their intention to relocate outside China. And this, those who are saying that we'll set up completely new facilities outside of China also comes to the fore here. And India has aided this process of shifting and trying to attract business from China by reducing a corporate tax rate for new companies to 17%, which is at par with the best in the world. And its consistent work on GST, on licensing policies, on single window clearances, and on opening up the public sector and all those reforms means that our ease of doing business rankings have improved 79 ranks and hence made us much more attractive to a foreigner. So FDI flows have been consistently rising. We need much more now, but you can see that we are already a magnet for FDI flows from the world because of these reasons. So to sum it up, India is expected by 2024 to become the third largest economy in the world following China and the US. So this is one of the reasons that FDI capital, and as you should see when we come to the market, FII capital is also flowing into India. So when we move into the markets and you look at global markets first, you will see that last year, most global markets were returning positive returns, right? That is 2019, pre-COVID. This year, you're seeing it's a mixed bag. In the US recovery, NASDAQ is up 24%, but Brazil, because it's commodity-oriented market, is down 42%. India is middle of the pack with a 2% negative return for foreigners, right? So Indian stock market, if you move to, and you look at first the sectoral performance, we covered the economy sectors. If you look at the sectoral performance, year basis to 1 month basis, what has changed? The banking sector has now started improving. In fact, today's RBI governor's announcement, the sector has improved even more. So you can see that's turned into green territory. IT and technology have been consistently green. That means the outlook has been good. Pharma, as you know, because of the COVID crisis, has seen a positive impact. Whereas in the consumption, it is a mixed bag because FMCG is recently found a challenge because of the valuations and the fact that the rural cases were on the rising. And whereas auto has shown a strong bounce back and consumer durables. If you go to the cyclical industrial sectors, naturally, even the RBI governor mentioned it today to say that he expects private capex to take some time to come back. And hence, if you see, those sectors are still in a 1 month on the red. If you look at the crisis impact, right, it's useful to compare 1 year returns. What I've done is I've compared the 1 year returns of March, which was the deepest crisis impact, and the 1 year return. Today, you can see all sectors were negative as of March. But now you can see that there are some sectors in the green and some are less red. So pretty much in the V-shaped recovery column, you can see that every sector has shown a positive change, either deep negative to less negative or from negative to positive. And because of this, you can see the ranking that which are the favored sectors by the market. Number one is the pharma healthcare. Reasons are obvious because of the COVID crisis and the fact that a vaccine or cure, wherever in the world it's discovered, is likely to be majorly manufactured by Indian pharmaceutical companies. So that benefit will accrue to them. Second is the IT sector. The IT sector is definitely a beneficiary. You saw that the world is moving digital with the whole COVID crisis, and lots of companies are using the crisis as an opportunity to improve their IT operations and back-end functioning, and IT sector will definitely benefit from that. The third is the auto sector. Part of the reason is that you saw the rise in private vehicle demand. With Diwali, that will expect to get a boost. With the Kharif harvest, there will be a further boost. Tractors are already rising. And last year was so bad for the auto sector that anything that comes now will look better on a YOY basis. Which are the sectors not recovered as much as that? The worst recovery is FMCG. I told you the reason for that because of the thing. Second is consumer durables, part of FMCG, part of the summer season. They missed out because of the COVID lockdown. Next summer will be good, but the market is yet to discount. The bank, it's basically because of the moratorium. People said that banks' NPAs will go up, and there was a slight bit of a worry on that front. Gradually, it's getting eased now, but definitely that's the reason that banking has not been a very good performing sector in the stock market, right? So now when you look at the sectoral to the market cap return, you'll see that across the card, whether it's large caps, mid caps, small caps, the market has turned into green territory, and the V-shaped recovery, comparing 1 year returns, tells you that every cap cow has seen a positive impact. If you see the V-shaped recovery in the 3 year returns, it's all about 24%. In the 1 year returns, it's about 30 to 45%, right? So what is the reason for this recovery? To understand the reasons, you will have to look at the impact of the earnings first, right? And if you see the lockdown impact, the quarter four earnings, which was very bad, got repeated in quarter one. So overall market has seen a 51% drop in profits. When you remove the banks, it's a 71% drop. If you break it up into large cap, mid cap, small cap, and micro cap, you can see that the small and micro caps are much more impacted in an economic downturn compared to the large and the mid caps, right? So Nifty spat growth after quarters of single digit positive have turned negative, and the flows which have come into the market, right, from domestic mutual funds and from FIIs, right? I'll summarize this in a different way to use for you. So if you look at it, right, of all the countries, emerging countries, last year, India was one among four countries to get positive $14 billion of inflows. This year, India is the only country within the emerging countries to get positive flows. So clearly, foreigners are looking in India. What are the reasons for this? I explained to you that we had the long-term projections for India looking good, V-shaped recovery. I should spell that out. But it's important to note that when the crisis hit, January, February, March, India also lost money compared to other countries. It's only post-April when they looked at the scenario for India and realized that India can come out of this crisis. And we have acted quite smartly with the severe lockdown that FIS again reposed confidence in India, and quarter on quarter that has continued, including this latest quarter, almost $500 million from 1st October to now has already come into our markets, right? So most emerging markets hence are showing a good recovery on account of the V-shaped recovery expressed everywhere. And India is probably the fastest growing 1 month return at 5.4% is the best of the lot, right? And if you look at the V-shaped recovery, again, India with a 38% leads the pack in terms of recovery because FII money has been coming in, right? And this FII money, if you look at it, is about $10 billion since April, which is translates to about 80,000 crores. So one of the reasons for the market to rise was the FII money coming in. And as you will see, mutual funds actually sold to FIIs and they started buying small and mid caps. So all parts of the market showed a positive. Another reason why FII money came in was a favorable currency outlook. If you see the interest rate differential, which is a key way to calculate the currency movements, the difference between the America rates and the Indian rates in the 10-year generally leads to the right kind of depreciation expectation, which is 5%. As you can see, over the last 4 quarters, that has been steady around 4.7 to 5.5. And long-term depreciation has also been 5%. But this, if you see, Indian rupee has only depreciated 3% from the beginning of the year, 1 year last year, and 3 months and 6 months actually been an appreciation of the currency. So when FIS put money, if the currency appreciates, they make more returns. So clearly, their bet on Indian currency improving. What is the reason for the currency's improvement? The reason is the crude price drop, which we referred to earlier, because India imports 80% of its crude. In addition, India also has the comfort of having a very healthy forex reserves. The Reserve Bank is holding $545 billion of foreign exchange reserves, which is a good figure for stability of the currency. One of the key things that FIIs look at, right? Third reason why the FI outlook has turned favorable is the expectation of the V-shaped recovery. How does this translate in the large caps, which is where the FIs are mostly interested? If you see here, right, from a level of 450 odd for the last 4 years, Nifty EPS is expected to sharply recover in the next financial year to 664. So this V-shaped recovery is what is being discounted by FIIs. So now when you look at the valuations, so what are they looking like? If you see, India has always been at a premium to the world and to emerging markets. The blue line is India's premium with the world. The green line is India's premium with emerging markets. If you see, in way back in 2017-18, we were at a 70% premium to emerging market and about 30% premium to the world. Since then, the premium corrected because of India's slowdown, but it corrected so deeply that today India became a value market. And that's why you see what I have circled, the money started coming and India. So the main reason was that compared to historic average, India's premium had corrected sharply, and hence FIS felt that it was a good price to buy Indian stocks, right? And in the context of that, for them, emerging market, which is where I compared in India, is literally less valued compared to the stock exchange of the S&P or the Europe or the Japan. So this also added to the flow to India. The third is that when you see the difference between the government of India's 10-year yield and you look at the Nifty's earning yield, which is the opposite of the P ratio, they converge together, which means that equity, if it's yielding the same return as debt, means that equity is cheap to buy. That's what this shows you. You see the previous crisis, that's what happened. The Nifty's levels rise when that difference narrows, right? So if you look at it here, another reason for the valuation thing is on the left-hand side is the P ratio of India compared to long-term average, and the right-hand side is the price-to-book ratio compared to long-term average. So if you can see here, while on private P ratio, we do seem to be trading above long-term average. On a price-to-book value, we are trading below our long-term average. So that's another reason for India to be attractive, right? The other thing is also the fact is that the Indian stock market P ratio is a function of just 10 stocks which have been taking up the prices. So if you take the overall Nifty here and take away those 10 stocks, you can clearly see the rest of the 40 stocks on a trailing PE are trading below the long-term average. So this rally, when it becomes more broad-based, it can easily absorb the excess cash coming in. In fact, from a forward PE perspective, same story is that with the future earnings also, if you take away those 10 stocks which have been driving the market up, there is enough room for further FII money to come and invest in the rest of the Nifty's stocks as and when the V-shaped recovery becomes apparent, right? So overall, if you look at it now, all the three indices, the valuations appear reasonable. To see this in numbers compared to the peak of December 17, when the Nifty was at about 17.8, today we are at 18.5. So just about 0.7 is the difference. Whereas the mid-cap index and the small-cap index have seen a correction from 24 to 15.5 and from 20 to 15.8. So overall valuations for the market are not looking so expensive. And in fact, the same story of price to earnings versus price to book is true of the mid-cap index as well as the small-cap index, right? So from that perspective, right, when you look at a forward for the financial year 22, as I told you, for large caps, 664 was the expected EPS, 16.5, and mid caps at 14 and small caps at 14 appears reasonable on a forward basis, right? So this is effectively telling you the market expects a 20 to 24% bounce back in earnings across the large, mid, and small caps, right? So to conclude, right, the position that I'd like to tell you is that it's the right time to have a tempered optimism. What has happened? I'm just summarizing here my whole presentation. The COVID has disrupted global growth, right? We see gradual economic recovery. India has opened with strong monetary support and a 10% GDP package. Supply normalization will bring the inherent consumption trends, and an improvement in economic will help alleviate the financial system stress. So amid the temporary income distribution created by the pandemic, we see rural India and the middle income urbanite as the segments of strength. And COVID has made India manufacturing case stronger on the global need to de-risk from China. So India remains in focus within the emerging market pack as Indian businesses remain attractive amidst the depressed earnings, and Indian markets see many beaten down stocks with a potential for bounce. So same thing in terms of the outlook. If you look at it for India specific, right? While this year has been disrupted by the pandemic, we expect an appreciable recovery in H2, right? On with both the stimulus. A supportive global backdrop will help improve our effectiveness of our response. Agri and rural are likely to be shielded from the pandemic, and the rural bias witnessed in the government programs will add a fillip to the same. Better turnaround times, price realization, continued MSP support, Rabi harvest, and agri arms are added positives. RBI has been quick and frequent to provide the well-needed liquidity to the system, which should be a prerequisite before the start of a growth recovery. Government has been very deliberate in its fiscal measures, delivering maximum impact outlay with minimum fiscal cost, and they are also rising along with the global trend to use guarantees instead of just giving away money, right? So the other reforms that the government has passed, the 4 labor codes, power sector, land sector reforms, ease of doing business, all of which will attract more FDI. Basic drivers of consumption are intact with the necessary easing of logistic resistance. Consumption recovery is just about a quarter away. It's important to note that we are still in the face of supply disruptions and the demand weakness has not set in. The fiscal package government is set to address this stress build-up, and medical support through the antiviral treatment and potential vaccine could provide further support and deliver upside to the recovery. On this basis, right, how should you look at your equity asset allocations, right? You should look at it based on the current status of the business cycle, right? When you look at the cycles, there are good cycles where demand is high, capacity utilization is rising, so investment cycles also starting, gives supply, brings on inflation, brings on interest rate. Whereas in a situation of a bad cycle, you have depressed demand, low capacity utilization, nobody making investments, and hence supply constraints, so inflation going up, and then that may lead to interest rates rising. So we are clearly in a vicious cycle now. As you can see, most of the features that are here are currently prevalent, right? So this cyclicality of the economy leads to cyclicality of the markets. And so when you now look at it from a cyclicality perspective, Indian economy has seen 4 cycles from April 2003, right? So 2003 to 8 was a good cycle, 8 to 13 was a bad cycle, 13 to 17 was a good cycle, and 17 to 20, we are in a bad cycle. So as you can clearly see in terms of the allocation, in the left-hand side where the good cycles are given, the right-hand side, the bad cycles are given. In a good cycle, all the stock market indices give you good returns, but small caps then tend to do better than mid caps, and mid caps do better than large caps. Whereas in a bad cycle, both small caps and mid caps get hurt, but large caps somehow end up protecting your capital or giving you smallish returns. So from that perspective of the cycle, in a bad cycle today, clearly the answer tells you that you got to look at it. So another way to understand this is the rolling returns methodology. I've explained this in past webinars. So if you do that, you will realize that with the timing impact, right, the maximum returns that you get across from a 18-year time frame from 2003 to now, 5,000 observations, you can see that you may get the maximum returns from small cap if your timing is right, and then large cap. But not that large caps give you bad maximum returns. They're giving you 48% per annum on a 3-year basis. But when you look at the loss risk, that the minimum return that you get, right, there if you see, the worst return you got from small cap was 21% per annum, whereas in large caps only 8%. Another way to look at it is look at the probability of loss, right? So the probability of losing capital if you stayed for 3 years is 7%, but it's 26%, 4 times as much in small caps, right? And if you look at inflation beating returns, right, large caps is about 70%, but small caps about 53%. So clearly large caps give you better protection in bad times, but don't give you as much return as mid cap in good times, right? But today being a relatively bad time that we are passing through, but in the future there is a good time, you have to be flexible in your approach. So as we are currently in the midst of a future cycle, for the next 1 year at least, the portfolio should have a bias towards large caps. And further, you can't ignore your own risk profile, right? So I'm going to look at it for 3 risk profiles here. So if you're an aggressive investor, then also, because we are in a bad cycle, you should have a 5-year horizon, but you should have a flexibility because of V-shaped recovery is on the way. So today I would say for an aggressive investor, put 50% in large caps and the balance into mid and small. Maybe a year later, you can increase the mid and small cap component. That's for an aggressive mentality person. For a more moderate person, right, I would suggest that you keep 70% in large caps today and maybe 30% in mid and small. Maybe a year later, you can make it 50-50. If you are of a conservative bent of mind, then I would say avoid small caps for the time being, put 80% of your money into large caps, and a year later, you can add about 10% of small caps into your portfolio, right? So with that, I come to the end of my webinar. Thank you for patiently listening, my friends, right? Happy investing and do stay safe through this pandemic period.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.